Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Now last week was pretty interesting because we did get some updates and some information as well. The major update of course came to the inventory where CCP added a nice red dot whenever something new comes into your inventory. Actually very annoying. I did salvaging for the first time with it, and it just keeps creating more red dots inside your inventory. Not really understand how this got through testing without noticing how user unfriendly this is, but well, there we go. It definitely makes for some interesting memes on the subreddit, and I'm pretty sure that CCP will revert that back, or at least change it to something that is dismissible with the least amount of effort required for something like that, or maybe an opt-in or something. I don't know. Now the actual big update of course was the changes to the anomalies, the ore anomalies in nullsec, massively nerfed, and it gave yeah, quite a bit of a scare to the people in nullsec, you could say. At first everyone thought that maybe CCP made a mistake, but nope, CCP is really going for a drought phase when it comes to the minerals, and this is what they want to do first before tackling a redistribution of the resources, and then finally landing on a dynamic system where well, resources will change depending on not just where what type of space it is, but also what's happening in those spaces. So I think it's very interesting, and of course this ought to dominate this EVE Talk. But before we get started, we will take a quick look at the New Eden store, of course, where we have a sale happening on some skins apparently. Heron Zento Isideko skin, Imicus Inner Zone Vanguard skin. That actually looks pretty nice. Sale on the Venture Load Strike skin. Obviously, I would say, yeah, if CCP wants to take advantage of their changes to the ores, then put up a sale for some mining ships, because all of a sudden that can be quite a bit more profitable for people that want to mine even in high-sec. Prospect Morphite Shine skin also receives a sale, so yeah, maybe CCP did just do that. And we get a bundle as well, the Sisters of Eve 1 Eden bundle. Don't even know what those look like. Oh, okay, alright, that's the Stradios one. Let's see what the Astero one looks like. Definitely interesting. Alright, a bundle that's for sale, so that's a pretty hefty discount from 470 plex to just 279. And then down here, that is it. Okay, very interesting. At least we get a couple of sales, and I received an email that the Omega time is 25% off at this point, so that could have an impact on the market as well. Of course, let's jump into that, and as always, we are going to start with some plex and stuff, and that is going to be at 320. There we go, and you can tell right here in Jita we've got one seller coming in at 3.4 million, a little bit below that. Then they're going for 3.5 million, and the buyers are staying below 3.3. Player owned trade hub, buyers don't really change, and the sellers, well, they're competing at that 3,388,000 ISK mark, and the first one coming in Jita as well. If we look at the chart, it's just more hesitation just above 325 on the average price. So I wouldn't really say that this is a direction, but there's a little bit of pressure on the price, and of course the fact that we got an Omega sale could have an impact on this as well. For now, I'm guessing personally, I think it'll forestall the increase in price, but yeah, it's been at this bottom range for quite a while at this point, like about 3 months. You can see here we reached that in December. Quite a bit of hesitation here, even in August and September. So basically, yeah, Plex has not been a good investment for the last 6 months or so. And in those 6 months, I've been telling you guys to, well, that in my opinion, of course, I'm always decently careful when it comes to that, but that buying close to that 325 million range, or especially below that, must be, in my opinion, a pretty good investment. Could be that this time we're stuck with a longer term, because you can clearly see that the last year's increase in price towards April was already well underway at this point, and here it's not happening yet, which I think is a little bit weird because we should have FanFest in April as well. So I was expecting something that resembled the first bar of the chart a bit more closely, but so far no cigars. After that, we've got the multiple pilot training certificate. That one does show a step up. Did so last week, of course, from 1.5 to above 1.6 billion. We're talking 1.65 billion for the sellers, 1.62 billion for the first buyer as well, 1.6 almost for most of them. So that that gap is closing, and it's the buyers that are forced up. You can see that the volumes are down as well. Basically, all the previous sales have been absorbed by the market, I think, and now we can start to look for trends both in this one and in Plex. And here we do have a jump up, so perhaps it is a first sign that Plex might be going up at some point. Let's take a look at the skill extractors next, of course very closely related to Plex as well, and this is starting to be a bit more interesting. Here we have a little bit of a difference. Plex is basically flat. We have a slight uptrend, 5-day moving average breaking away from the 20-day moving average, and the daily averages are going up away from that 380 million mark. Sellers are coming in at 385 in a player owned trade hub and at 392 in Jita, and buyers are forced up to 377. That margin is gone as well because buyers are slowly moving closer and closer, giving a bit more breathing room to these sellers. In my opinion, this is like a second telltale sign that we should be going up in price. At this point, I'm gonna say that Plex is forestalling because of the Omega sale that CCP is adding to the game. Next up we have, well, it's not permanent, it's like a temporary sale, but I got that email. Let's move on to the injectors. Here are the large scale injectors, also a little bit of a jump up here away from 800 million ISK as the average price, 830 almost now for the sellers. In Jita we're talking 864 already. That's definitely some upwards pressure, and buyers are now forced up to more than 800 million as well. Here the good times are definitely over. This was a very noticeable bottom, which we have to be fair here, was available in November, was available in September, and even in early September twice, basically below the 800 million mark. If you haven't bought them by now, I'm afraid you'll be a little bit too late to grab them below 800 million, because looking at the Jita sale prices, I do think that the increase in prices is going to start at any moment. For the small scale injectors, we get that same pattern, although again bottoming out at around 160 million. We're heading back towards 170 for the average price. It's 168 for the sellers, 157 for the buyers, and this is really where you can see if last week large scale injectors, for instance, were in this very same spot. The average price is now right on top of the sell prices. That does eventually, of course, force buyers up in price as well, giving us more room and thus starting that increase in price. Let's see if it materializes. Of course, that I think depends quite a bit on announcements from CCP. We got a first couple, of course. We get those changes to the resources that they're planning to do. We get a new update as well, focusing on wormhole connections, and then we have the Guardians Gala. I only did one side so far. Decently rewarding, actually, to my surprise. Not too difficult in the rattlesnake, of course, but yeah, CCP is keeping up with the updates. Hopefully they can come out with more information, and I'm really curious, getting very curious, to be honest, as to what they'll announce at FanFest. So that's the small scale injectors. We still have to take a look at the daily alpha injectors, and this is very unusual. From a cycle at a low point below 40 million ISK, we finally broke back above that, and look at that supply coming in. I wonder if it's a sale or if it's really people just dumping those daily alpha injectors, being able to sell them for 45 million ISK and dumping them right back down to one year low point. 35 million now for the sellers, 34.5 million for the buyers. Completely, that's only one of them. 31 million for the next one. Very, very weird one. I'm gonna assume here actually another sale. I cannot imagine that all of a sudden people are going to start to dump from 44 million all the way down to 35 million without having a serious advantage from the real money exchange. After that, we get the hypercores that are basically flat at 360. Not much to say, a bit of pressure at the tail end there, but yeah, this is of course bound to be pretty stable and a sign of, I think, what's happening with the hypernet. I honestly don't really dare to speculate on that. Seems decently stable. This is like 1, 2, almost 3 months. Yeah, I think that's time enough for the system to be digested, the newness to have worn off, and so I think that at this point the hypernet will have found its niche. Of course, there's definitely stuff you can see here, for instance, Vendetta Blueprint that is being spammed in Jita Local. Very expensive items that usually don't sell on the market will probably still find their way in the hypernet. And then honestly, if you do the calculations, you might be pick up a good deal as well there. But the big advantage, of course, to the sellers, generally speaking, if they can find enough gamblers. Let's move on to the mineral market next. That ought to be interesting at 10:35. And so you know here last week, especially if you followed the channel, I made a couple of videos about this, that the ore anomalies in nullsec have been massively nerfed, and this has resulted in some panic buying. So let's get on that titanium chart. You can see here the volume spike a couple of days ago, highest spike almost in a year, but look at this spike just had no impact on the price. Here we pushed ourselves up from the 6 to 650 range to 6, let's see here in system, 753 for the first seller in Jita, 684 for the buyers. That's decently interesting though. We do have some sellers coming in the player owned trade hubs as well, competing very quickly for 750 all the way down to 713 already. Just one jump out in the Tranquility trade tower. So this is clearly an attempt from people that are trading actively to move the market away from Jita 4.4 into the player-owned trade hubs. Will they succeed? That is going to be rather difficult to say, but we'll keep an eye on that as well, of course. After that, we have pyrite. Here we have a much more pronounced spike that actually wasn't there when I checked it right after the announced changes. You can see that the volume response was quite a bit lower than for titanium. We started at, let's say, 550, and right now pyrite is selling for 769. Has it overtaken? It has overtaken titanium for the first time in years at this point, which is actually its normal. It's normal situation, because you're getting far more titanium from the ores that you mined than pyrite, just in numbers. So 770 for the sellers of pyrite, 709 for the buyers as well, forced up massively all of a sudden. A bit of this has to be speculation on CCP deciding that they want to restore order in these minerals as well, that they want to do away with these inversions, and there's actually more of them. Isogen is inverted compared to Mexilon as well, and Megasite is inverted compared to Zydrine normally. So this is a huge change, of course, a huge win as well for pyrite, that now on a 1-year basis has almost doubled, or yeah, almost doubled in price. That would have been your good investment about a year ago, of course. So very, very interesting stuff as well. I'm really surprised that this move has happened on not really abnormally high volume. Sure, it's above the average for like the last 5 days, but it's nothing too crazy. So that also does show that you know, that much in reserve on the market itself was not available. Next up, we've got Mexilon here, much bigger response in the volumes, and then the price actually not as big as for pyrite. So we jumped up from around a 55 to 58 range, I would say, to 66.71 at this point for the sellers, 60 ISK for the buyers. We're definitely selling at a high range, but it is not completely crazy for Mexilon either. And again, keep one thing in mind, of course, the chart, the 1-year chart that you're seeing here is actually very much in line with the historical price range of Mexilon, at least in my experience, in my about a decade of playing EVE Online. It's the same thing for titanium actually. 750 as a sell price for titanium has always been a very good price. 6 ISK the average, 5 ISK and below that, where I would always say, no, I'm not gonna sell or even focus on titanium at this point anymore. pyrite, historically speaking, has always been worth more than titanium by quite a bit, and as a result, I think that's why we have, well, an impact on the Mexlon and titanium prices, but it is not something that pushes it up to 100 ISK or anything like that. From a historical perspective, that makes sense. Let's take a look at Isogen then. Now that's one big volume spike. That's like 5 times, I think, at least the average volumes, even more if you like it. That's kind of crazy. And we went from less than 15 ISK and we're now selling for 21.45. Not that big. Well, it's still like more than 25% jump though. 17.45 for the sellers, and of course 21 if we look for that on the chart, a 1-year high point as well. And I think here we can clearly see that for Isogen, this is the big speculation that I actually mentioned quite a few times, especially when we reach other 1-year lows. If there's one mineral that has struggled and that has borne the brunt of all of the negative impacts price-wise from the changes that CCP has done to mining ships, like introducing the Rorcalas being the very best chip, but also the mineral rebalance where they made Nullsec far more self-reliant, and then also just changes with moon mining, all of that stuff. Well, Isogen was the biggest victim, and so it's your biggest gamble that if CCP decides to do something, the one mineral that could gain the most from all of that is of course Isogen, which historically used to be worth like twice what Mexlon was at least. So you can see if something like that were to happen, it's a 10-fold price increase. So not sure if that's exactly how CCP is going to balance things, but just keep that historical perspective in mind. I think it helps to understand why this volume spike is so massive compared to the previous minerals. After that we get Noxium, another really big mineral spike. Here my personal expectation is that, or my personal reading of the situation is that the market figured out that this was the mineral that would be impacted the most by potential changes, the anomaly changes in Nullsec. So we start at 250 ISK and now we're selling for 427, 385 for the buyers. Noxium also actually at a historic low point. This stuff used to be worth, I don't know, was it 1100? If not that, at least several hundred ISK. More than yeah, I think it's like 1200 I think was an Noxium price that I remember, but here now clearly a massive breakout and more than a very clear 1-year high point as well on another massive volume spike due to all the changes and the announcements there. So also potentially, of course, if you have some Noxium stocks lying around, a pretty good time to take a profit. So that was Noxium. Next up we have the Zydrine market, a volume increase, but here the change is quite a bit more muted. On the other hand, we are breaking out to 550 for the sellers. It's actually 581 now for the sellers, 530 for the buyers. So we're also at a 1-year high point for Zydrine. And then Megasite, you may have seen it from the ticker, finally responds, like basically a day late response, and bounces from 350 to 411 for the sellers. Still not really great, but at least we do get an increased price for Megasite as well. And then finally we get Morphite, which I'm expecting. Oh, I thought it would not really be impacted. It's not that big, but 15,000 ISK on the chart. Look at the availability, that's practically gone. 14,600 for the sellers. This is indeed just basically a casualty. Well, a casualty, it just builds from a strong point to another 1-year high point. So yeah, holding on to your Morphite that you bought in like May would have actually been a good idea looking back now. But of course, Captain Hindsight is always right, but he's always late to the party as well. So very interesting week, of course, for minerals. I did not expect CCP to come up with a drought, a shortage period needed in order to then move on to a different system. Potentially massive shocks to the entire economy because of this, of course, because the mineral market is basically the bedrock of the entire industry economy. You need thick ones chips and materials, even for Tech 2 production. A little bit less in Tech 3, I think, but capitals, supers, all of that is based on minerals. You need minerals for structures as well. So this could really be very interesting as CCP develops this and as they come out with their plans. So keep a close eye on that. I myself have started mining a little bit, focusing on compressing some ores. I do believe that if CCP goes for not just a dynamic system, but also for differences between the spaces, that trade in resources will really increase in value, and then it's not really the minerals themselves but the compressed ores that are the most efficient way of moving these resources around. So that's going to be the extra product, by the way. Gonna take a look at the compressed ores for that. Let's move on to the PI market then, coming in at 1955. Here I'm then not expecting that much, considering that the whole market will have been focused on the mineral market at this point, and last week we were still in basically too low demand. What we see here for broadcast nodes basically recovering back to the 2 million mark, but this is very narrow range, so this is pretty damn stable actually. It's just above 2 million for the sellers, and it is just below 1.9 million for the buyers. Anything special in perimeter or so? Not really. So this is basically still the 2 million for broadcast nodes. Not really a change in the situation. Construction blocks, very nice to see that come back to 12,000 disk apparently at the high range here, so that is interesting. 12,162 for the sellers, bit above average. 10,700 for the buyers. I would say that from last week we have closed the gap a little bit. This does start to feel like construction blocks could get back to that 11,000 average pretty easily at this point. Also has a little bit of room still for volatility because there is still a decently wide gap between sellers and buyers, which is still one indication that buyers aren't really there just yet. Consumer electronics next. I think last week that was terrible, and it is still not good despite the fact that we have a couple of very good volume days. We're staying well below average. I think here investors are taking advantage of the situation. In fact, the first seller is really losing patience and selling at 10,500. Most are coming in at 11,700, let's say, but that is still well below the 12,500, which would be the average range for consumer electronics. You can see that there's quite a bit of selling below 12,000 as well, and buyers are coming in at 10,500 to 10,300 disk, and I would say that here these volumes are position taking from investors. You're buying so low. If we do make a comeback, you actually buy really well. Demand wise, yeah, this still doesn't feel like it's that great. We don't even have half a dozen buy orders at over 10,000 disks, so it's definitely not there yet. The coolants market was doing okay last week, bit of a correction down to 11,000 disks, but we're already bouncing back, basically back on our average. So we're talking 13,500 disks for the sellers, that's actually a bit above average. 11,700 for the buyers, that's a really good price. Coolants is doing very well. Cryoprotectant solutions. Okay, interesting as well. Must be tied to either the wormhole or the Guardian's Gala, but yeah, some more implant stuff apparently, because we're spiking back up to 180,000 again. Complete lack of availability, almost 300,000 disks now for the sellers in the trade hubs. Nothing to report there. Buyers at 135,700. Another spike for cryoprotectant solutions, presumably on more implant stuff. Enriched uranium is pretty flat at 14k, I'd say maybe a touch below average, but very close to it. 14,200 for the sellers, 13,300 for the buyers. Less than 1,000 disk in margin. This is actually the normal situation with decent demand. So that's what we're looking for right now, though you can clearly tell that for a lot of them, a lot of the, what are they called here, refined PI materials were actually in much bigger margins, and it's because the demand just isn't there. Integrity response zones is very interesting. Spiked down to 225, we get a volume increase, and then we're back up. So I think here we get more position taking. 2.5 million for the sellers, 2.3 million for most buyers. Definitely up quite a bit all of a sudden from last week. Here again, I think that we were diving down. Buyers maybe were just not in the market either, and some investors saw the opportunity and grabbed their integrity response drones, hoping for a CCP announcement, of course. Mechanical parts also recovering back to 11,000 discs. That's actually pretty good news here. 11,400 for the sellers, 10,700 for the buyers. Again, less than 1,000 disc margin between the two here. We get decent amounts of fuel related stuff is actually doing really well, able to command their average prices. It's just the other stuff that's not always doing that well. Organic mortar applicators, slight jump up on terrible volumes. This is basically, I would say, still below average in all likeliness. 1 million for the sellers and 950,000 is for the buyers. Definitely something, if you want some organic mortar applicators, put up a buyer below 1 million ISK. Look where we're at on the chart. It should be quite okay if CCP announces something that will increase production, of course. Yeah, maybe if this is one gamble, now that I talk about it, that you could consider. I personally don't think I'm gonna do it, but investing now in advanced PI materials, expecting that not only will the drought be real, but that the answer to it will turn out to be moon mining. Then you could see a massive boost in production of refineries, of course. That could mean increased demand for these advanced PI materials. But I myself think that if CCP says that they want a period of drought, a period of shortages, that I think that they're just gonna hit those just as hard as the anomalies. That is my expectation, but I have to be honest, I know just as much as you guys. Next up, we have the robotics market. That's interesting. First fuel-related material that's really not doing well and actually going down to less than 90,000 disc all of a sudden. We're talking 93,500 for the sellers, but 88,000 for the buyers here. So that one is clearly below average. Basically right now, you've got super cheap robotics, something for maybe the longer term. It could be interesting. I would definitely try to grab it from a buy order at this point. Keep one thing in mind. Over the last year before this clear trend break, it was very narrow, a very narrow range here as well, between 95k and 110,000 disc. Not exactly the type of range where you're gonna make a lot of profits. Self-harmonizing power cores spiking as well on a volume. I think here again investors are, or maybe they're just, you know, also pricing in that potential increased demand, as I've said, for all of the refineries that might be in production. That is something that I did notice as well, and I want to give you guys as an anecdote. I went to sell my BPCs, and the refinery BPC went for like 40 million ISK at the cheapest in Jita, completely gone from the market. So there's definitely this rush that has already happened to getting refineries ready, if that's the answer. But who knows what CCP actually announces there. So I still feel like this remains a bit of a gamble. Self-harmonizing power core selling for 2.4 million, buyers at 2.2 million, and we come from less than 2 million. So that's obviously, even if it's not gambling on the refinery boom, this is actually an understandable investment as well, looking at where we start from. Superconductors, ooh, that's great news. Finally, those are back because I produced these as well. Been a hard couple of months just having to sit on them, but selling now for 14,700 disc, 12,500 as well for the buyers. That's pretty damn good for a buy price, and it's actually quite a bit of them. So for the first time here, I can say there's a refined PI material that has struggled through the fall and the winter that has demand coming back. Superconductors, 1 year high point at almost 15,000 disc. It is the time for me to try and sell these at a good price. My patience has finally paid off. That is great news. Test cultures continuing to meander around 10,000 disc. Sometimes it's 11k, probably sellers, and 9,000 for the buyers. And then the sellers are coming in here, the aggressive ones at least. It was 10,750 for most of them, less than 10k for quite a few sellers. That's going to be a problem. 8,000 now for the buyers. That super big margin is definitely potentially a problem as well. So be very careful with test cultures, I would say. And then finally we get the wetware mainframes, another volume spike going up to 2.4 million ISK for the sellers, yeah, and 2 million for the buyers. Bit of a premium to be paid there as well. Let's take a quick look at timing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one is like the 5th day ago. And then for the mineral spike, let's take titanium. 1, 2, 3, 4 days ago. So here, if I want to put my tinfoil hat on, it is noticeable that we have not here, but in the integrity response drones. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, look at that volume increase right there. That was already in the works. Organic mortar applicators, 1, 2, 3. So that's the 5th day as well. Then we get those self-harmonizing power cores. That's the day before the mineral spike. And then finally the wetware mainframes. Very noticeable spike here. Did someone know something? Honestly, I don't really think so, because the spikes, especially in self-harmonizing power cores, for instance, do start at a logical place when the chart broke 2 million ISK. So honestly, I don't think that that's the case, but it is quite noticeable. If it turns out that there does end up to be a refinery boom, whoever bought here probably made a very good purchase. Next up, advanced moon materials coming in at 29.45. Let's take a look at these crystalline carbonite bouncing back. So here the volatility continues. This is very interesting. Usually when we see a big volume spike on something, maybe a low point or something like that, and then volatility starts to decrease. Here we actually have an increase in the spikes, and it is just continuing. So we went from 170 down to probably 145 or so. We're back to 168 for the sellers and 154 for the buyers. Yeah, crazy volatility in the crystalline carbonites. Right now 168, was that really the sellers? Yeah, getting back close to that 170. Pretty good time to sell if you have some that you grabbed from buy orders. Ferrite carbide is actually on a downtrend then at this point, getting back to 130 range, 133 for the sellers, 125 for the buyers. So here you could try to buy because 125 is pretty low on the chart. Not yet a low point, but you know, it would make sense to try a buy order here rather than a sell order. Then we have our titanium carbide that is very flat. Caldari ship production, I guess because they're such good PVE platforms. You know, 175 definitely a bit higher than the others as well. 177 for the sellers, 175 for the buyers. Look at that super narrow margin. Very, very stable for titanium carbides. You know, that would be if you're like focusing on production and want something that seems to be pretty stable. That would be my focus. Tungsten carbide next, bit of a bounce off from 175 as well. Decently stable too, 182 in fact for the sellers, 171 for the buyers. All right, we get one bounce back, one bounce down, and then two pretty stable materials. After that, we get the metamaterials. Photonic is continuing a slow decline now and breaking the 15,000 mark. 15,000 for the sellers, 14,900 for the buyers. This looks like a one-year low point. It is a one-year low point. It's your decision to make, of course, but if I would be buying anything, I'd be looking at photonic metamaterials for less than 15,000 ISK. Plasmonic metamaterials, that's a completely different story. Well above 20,000 ISK and actually able to sustain that range pretty well at this point. 21,500 for the sellers, 20,000 for the buyers. That's a decent spot, I would say. We have our non-linear metamaterials next that are actually crawling away from the bottom range, getting back to 25,000 ISK, 24 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. Decently narrow margin, strong demand. It's also Caldari, so stable economy underneath that normally for production. Looks pretty good for producers, not exactly something to gamble on. And then we have the terahertz metamaterials that are flat below average, so this is basically the exact opposite from the Caldari range. It is the Amar range, below average but very stable as well. Bit of a drop off at the tail end here, but we are talking 21,000 for the sellers, 19,400 for the buyers. Nothing drastically terrible or anything like that. Yeah, the only thing that really stands out here is the photonic metamaterials at a one-year low point. That's at least for like the Tech 2 ship production and things like that. Let's take a look at the other advanced moon materials next. Ferrite carbide flat at 90k, right on the average. Early start of the year above that, second half of the year below that. Not much to say in my opinion. Next up here we get ferrogel, flat at 40,000 ISK, clearly below average but away from its bottom. I'd say you're too late to buy and you're too early to sell on this one. Fullerite, bit of a spike up to what is it here? Maybe 1200 ISK or something like that. No, 1150 in fact, and now landing back at 1000 ISK. This one is also back on its normal range. Hypersynaptic fibers. Actually going down to less than average. Let's see where the buyers are at for this one. 11,700 for the sellers, 11,000 for one buyer, and then it's 10,900. If we look for 11,000 on the chart, you can clearly see that anything below that doesn't last for very long. So if you can buy these for less than 11,000 ISK, I would say that that is not bad at all. Nano transistors next. That one, 5,500 on the average for the chart. And keep in mind, this was a complete supplyless summer that gave us 6,000 discs. So this is still doing quite okay. Phenolic composites actually doing really well despite a volume spike. Don't see that much of a move on the price range. 2,237 for the sellers and 2,100 for the buyers. Very, very good price. Slightly above average, I would say. Bottoms go to like 1,750 and less than that, so we're definitely away from that problem. Ceramic fibers, bit of pressure, staying above 400 for 2 for the sellers, 380 for the buyers, 380 on the chart. Let's see if we can look for that. Not the bottom just yet, so here I would be patient. Honestly, the only one that really stands out to me is the photonic materials for this week. Let's move on to the Tech 2 ship market then. Let's take a look at the impact there, coming in at 35 minutes. Like that. The Aries, first of all, continuing a slow decline. It is slowing down, landing on 25 million. 25.4 million for the sellers, 22.9 million for the buyers. Okay, you could try that if you're gonna gamble on an Aries spike. You can definitely do that. Keep one thing in mind. I'm noticing one spike, two spikes. That's pretty much it. It's not as volatile as some of the others that we take a look at, but you're buying pretty damn low at the moment. The Basilisk was doing really well last week at around 230, finally dropping off a little bit, landing on 200 million, 212 still for the sellers, 190 for the buyers. Excuse me, that is in my opinion still too early to actually call it a purchasable bottom. I'm actually gonna drink a little bit here. It's just water from a bottle, if anyone's curious. Yeah, Cerberus, you could risk it, but I would prefer to see us below 190, closer to that 180 range, 185 or something like that, to get an absolute certain purchase there. Cerberus, that is interesting because I managed to grab one again. So here I bought one last time for, let's see here, it was, I think here, nope. Yep, I bought one for 195, sold it for 249, and I bought another one for 195 on the second decline as well. We're back up to 232 already, so I could already make some profit on that. Buyers are forced up to 206 as well, so your buy opportunity is already over. But that is very interesting. I actually grabbed, I only wanted one because I'm not gonna like spend billions of ISK or anything like that. But if you can do like a one volume trade that actually gets you a decent amount of profit, you're just not gonna have an impact on the market, as you can ride these waves very well. We rode this first wave. Now second wave, we'll see if it's started or not. You guys now know my range, 250. I'd definitely be very happy with that, so we're gonna keep an eye on that. Second Cerberus trade in like 2 months, that would be very nice, of course. Let's see if it happens. But yeah, I bought another one for 195 on this second decline as well. You can see the chart stays above 200 million ISK, but the buyers now are at 206. But yeah, we went very low all of a sudden in the buyers on this second dip. Maybe a little bit of overproduction or something like that created an opportunity, and I definitely grabbed it. Next up here we got the Crow, very flat at 27.5, so that's not exactly where we should be investing or selling, in my opinion. Why do I keep the Crow here? I think it's very interesting. Interceptors, for instance, that are a bit more stable can be a very interesting data point for just the general Tech 2 vibe. After that we got the Guardian, a double spike up from 250 here to 280 million all of a sudden. That's really interesting. 267 now for the sellers, 219 for the buyers. If you still have like a cheap Guardian around, which I wonder if I do. Oh no, I bought for 180, sold for 239. Again, I did make the trade, but I sold too soon. I sold for 240, could now be selling for 260, 265, probably pretty damn easily. So while I'm making a profit here, what I'm gonna have to learn to do now is to time my sales a little bit better. I'm already really happy with having bought this one at 180, and so now what I'm personally looking at for the garden is going to be, do we have a decline? Like with the Cerberus, after reaching this high point, will producers go overboard? Will we see massive supplies driving us back down to an opportunity to buy at 180? You best be sure that I will try to make another move on that one again, because these successful trades, if I can make them again and again, that would be very nice, of course. After that, we've got the Hawk that did a surprise spike up to 60 million ISK PVE ship, in my opinion. So there could be a reason for that. It's already declining back down. We're at 38 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers. Pretty respectable. Look out if this continues though, and you get buyers close to 30 million ISK, that would be worth it to take a look at. The Heretic continuing its increase in average price up to 90,000 ISK, so we're gonna have no availability. Exactly, 100 million for the sellers, 70 million for the buyers. They're finally forced up a little bit. That's very interesting. But what does it take for that? A complete drying up of the market. I do think at some point we'll see Heretics come back, of course, because now that you can try to sell them for this price range, that should be pretty enticing for people to try and produce them. But yeah, this increased price is not because of demand, it's just a complete lack of supply that has caused this. After that, we've got the Hound going back to 35 million ISK, 34 million now for the sellers, 28.5 for the buyers. Definitely well away from the bottom. And in fact, yeah, another spike. And here, compare that to the Aries with its two spikes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could say 6, but this one would be difficult to take advantage of. But very noticeable volatility, of course, in the Hound, full of opportunities. Trying to... Let's see what I got around. I'm not even sure anymore. I still have some stealth bombers, but I think it's these. I think it's the Manticores for 24 and a Nemesis for less than 19. I'll need to look into that on my main tune. The Ishtar, a bit of surprise jump up to 250, so going well above average all of a sudden. 240 for the sellers, 224 for the buyers. My personal theory on this one would also be the change to anomalies. If you can't mine anymore because there's no more ore to mine, then you might as well go rat, and that could be an Ishtar. Is actually like one of the very strong platforms to do so rather passively. After that, we get the Manticore, which, as I've said, I should have one that I bought at 24 million. It's now selling for 32.6. Buyers are up to 29. I could definitely grab a profit from that. Although my personal feeling is that we could play with 35 million. So maybe I'll hold on to these for just a little bit longer. After that, we get the Munin that had a bit of a double spike last month, up to 280 million ISK. We're stabilizing at around 230, 231 for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. Not much to say here. Nemesis next. That one is actually going back down to less than 25 million. 25 million for the sellers, 22.7 for the buyers. So here, yeah, you can clearly see that the chart can go close to 20 million. So be a bit patient before jumping in on the Nemesis. The Oneros is also stabilizing around the 200 million range apparently. 199 for the sellers, 178 for the buyers. I don't like the Oneros myself because of the lack of volumes. I would never dare to go with more than one ship at a time when we're trading here, and I would definitely need a very, very pronounced buy price. 178 is not that bad. I mean, it's below 180, but I think it's just very difficult to make that trade happen. I'm keeping it here because it's another logistics cruiser, which on a war situation or something like that, you do have crazy opportunities. The Purifier jumping up to well above 30 million. So here again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th spike at this point. Not super great at the tail end here, but we'll have to see what we do with the range. 36 million for the sellers, 32 million for the buyers. The real question is, will these become the new bottoms close to 20 million, or are we going to recover, get spikes back in that 40 million range, and then we'll landing at 25 million or getting below 30 million show us the buy opportunities, which in the first half of the year, that's where you could have bought Purifiers, of course, and then sold them for 40, 45 million. Now, is the range lower, or what's happening there? That's the real question, of course. The Saber, exact opposite of the Heretic, diving down to a 1-year low point, selling for 62 million. Buyers are coming at a 56.5. I think now I'm again going to try to grab a Saber for like well below 60 million. Look at that on the chart. It's 56.5 million. I've tried several times before with the Heretic as well. Never actually managed to grab one, and I think that this really shows that supply is what it's all about. And here we do have supply. Despite the fact that these prices are so bad in the last 24 hours, we are still bringing more Sabers to the market. So I'm again gonna try and make that investment, but I'm not going for those sell orders, I'm going for those buy orders. I need that massive premium, and then I'm hoping that CCP comes in, brings back the interdictors from the brink of relevance in JITA somehow, and that's when we'll have made a very good trade. And then yeah, look at that difference, of course. 1-year low point for the price, and still that supply comes in. And then of course the Heretic is the exact opposite, 1-year high point pretty much, and then supply is nowhere to be seen. This should turn around at some point. If you're looking for the investments, it's pretty obvious that the Saber is where it's at right now. After that, we've got the Scimitar doing okay, staying well above 200 million on average, 213 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. I would move on that one. And then the Zarmast is stabilizing at 300 million ISK here. So at this point, to me, it looks like, at least if we look at the Zarmast, that the conduit nerf is not having that big of an impact on the Triclavian supply just yet. We'll keep an eye on that. Maybe later down the line we'll take a look at that as well. Next up, the Tech 3 ship market, 45.10. Okay, making a good time this week. Confessor, let's get started with that one. Actually down a little bit. I thought that that one could see some upward pressure, although last week, if I'm not mistaken, we still had a decent amount of supply, and now it is happening. 38.5 million for the sellers, 32 million for the buyers. It's a margin that has opened up, but look at the supply. This is it. Can't scroll anymore. Last 24 hours, nothing here. So Confessor, people said, you know what? Why the hell are we going to bring more Confessors to the market when we can sell like the Jackdaw that actually spiked up to 70 million ISK. So here we do see that market response. We should see the Confessor prices go up as well at this point. 40 million is usually my reference point for like a stability place. Next up here we get the Hecate, that's actually trying to land at 40 million ISK here. We've got 41 million for the sellers, 38 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, just 4 sell orders, 14, 10, 15. Nothing crazy. This is quite okay, especially considering that we're still above 40 million ISK. I feel like this is very normal, and that we can basically pretty easily land at 40 million or stay well above that, because of course of this, the Jackdaw that is apparently flown by many sites in Nullsec. I can understand, love the ship, it's a great ship, missile platform, can be used as a sniper, can be super fast, can be very tanky actually with its modes. This is an incredible ship in my opinion. Went up to 70 and maybe even almost 80 million ISK as the average price on a day. It's back down to 65 million, 5 million almost for the buyers as well, which is still very great. And of course, if you're wondering where is the supply, last 24 hours, and we can still browse, and yeah, there we go. So that's quite a few Jackdaws, and it's quite normal, of course. What are you going to produce and bring to the market? In this situation, it's Jackdaws, and of course this gives some breathing room to normally this Vapel as well. Actually no, now it is back down to 35 million. That's a bit of a surprise, although buyers sellers are already back up to 36.5, buyers are 33, and here you can see supply just 4 lines and less than 10 on each sell order. This is quite normal. I think that this Vapel actually will recover a little bit from that. Buyers at 33 million. Yeah, it's again that gamble now. You're buying at the low end of the range. If this Jackdaw needs even more production to fill that gap, and then they need a little bit of Confessor production as well, we could actually see this Vapel take most advantage of this Jackdaw spike at this point as well. Pretty interesting stuff in my opinion. And what the hell is happening here in local? That's okay, we'll see. Completely missed that. Lots of X's all of a sudden in JITA local. Let's move on to the cruisers. Here is the Legion that is going for 150 million. Slight move up, but basically at the normal price range. It's actually 160 for the sellers and 138 for the buyers. Average price is right in between these two. That is actually pretty damn interesting. New supply 29 here. Nothing too special, but this means that you can actually buy them for 138 million. The only way that that can happen, that we get this 150 average price range, if someone sells to these buyers as well. So yeah, you can still get that Legion for that buy price. 138 is definitely still at the low end of the chart, so it is for your consideration. I personally think that it's a bit of a gamble in the cruiser market. The Loki spiking up to 1 year high point of 250, 259 for the sellers, in fact 222 for the buyers. I would say at this point also increased volumes here must be Nosik related as well. The Loki is now considered, I think, the best Tech 3 cruiser by a mile because of its double tank bonus, and so here I think eventually this is bound to be Nosik related as well. Proteus is decently stable, but then below average. Currently selling for 145 million, yep, and buyers at 130. That is still pretty damn cheap as well. And then we've got the Tengu that actually spiked up a little bit. We get sellers at 171 million, buyers still at 143. Last 24 hours supply is starting to fill that opportunity very quickly as well, just for a slightly above average price. So really the Loki is the one that stands out, where you still have like higher buy prices as well. All the others are doing okay on sell prices and are basically close to their bottoms for buy prices. Kind of a crazy situation, showing that, in my opinion, Tech 3 cruisers are not really in the meta. And then for the and then I don't mean in Nosik, but I just mean generally speaking. The interest isn't that high. And then we get the extra product. Of course, I have to take a look at the compressed ores here, coming in at 50.30. So we're gonna do a search for that. Compressed. And that should be in manufacturing and research. There we go. We're gonna go over these pretty quickly, but I want to get a general feel for the trend. You can clearly see the volume spike right here. Normal price range 30 to 35,000. Now selling for what? No. Normal price range, excuse me, 300 to 350,000, now going for 373. So we do have a spike up to 500k, and then some, no, that's actually, yeah, some newer orders that are far more reasonable in price. Availability, not that great, of course. Compressed Azure Plagio Classe, not too much to see here. 7,500 on the chart. That's definitely quite a premium to be bought. I'm surprised that the volume here isn't higher. Compressed Bistots, that's actually, yeah, a bit of a volume spike here. Nothing that special. Normal range 250, 3010. 310, so that's definitely up as well. Now in ice we are not gonna see anything. In fact, fuels are so low, it must be ice as well. That is very low and super abundant. We can see that right here. Bright spodumene, that's very nice, I would say. Normal price 400k, now 665,000 disc. That's a 50% premium. Brilliant nice is also a ore, and that one hasn't moved that much. So that's ice again, that's at a low point. Concentrated Veldspar, yeah, in the low end minerals I think we'll see an actual big impact. Look at the volume impact, very very noticeable. Price takes off from less than 2,000 disc and is now at 2,400 disc. So it was quite a bit more volatile in those first few days, but we're still getting quite a nice premium. Scordite also 1 year high point, I think. Sellers above 3,000 disc. That's around here on the charts. Crimson Arcanor, not much to say. So some of them of course will have quite terrible volumes. Compressed Crocite, normal range 300,000, currently 600,000, a doubling in the price. Let's see if there's anything else that I immediately recognize to be a little bit more low end, like Plagio Class actually is low end. Not really a noticeable volume spike, but sellers are at 7,000 disc. That's not even that crazy. Pyroxeres tied to the Noxium market, of course, where we saw a big move as well. Volume wise, nothing too crazy, normally 5k, and now 7,400 disk, 50% increase in price as well for those sellers. Anything else here? Quick look at Hedberg Guide, definitely spiking up, but this is like a little bit too small a market. But Vitric Hedberg Guide definitely going up as well. What's this for a price? 36k. Now it's all gone. Yeah, that is quite noticeable. A small market completely dried up from sellers. This is not compressed Veldspar. Take a look at that one. Look at the volumes here all of a sudden. And then we have 2,500 disk for the sellers. Normally this goes for like less than 2,000 disk. So this is another pretty good premium. And this is actually what I've been doing. I have been taking out my Orca, mining some high-sec ores and compressing them, getting ready to try and sell those from the market to take advantage of the situation. Although I'm first going to scope out exactly what CCP's plans are, but it does show, in my opinion, that this is going to be full of opportunity, and that the value of compression really stands to rise. In fact, you can see that a premium is already built into the market. And I think that that trend is only going to continue as we hit a shortage phase and then eventually a redistribution and a dynamic phase. Being able to transport resources is going to be very important. And if there's any need for imports, it's going to be with compressed stuff. And so that should be where we see an increase in value. Compressed pure jaspet, 40k normal range, 65 to 66,000 now for the sellers. So another premium example of CCP making changes, and then the sandbox economy responding to all of that. I'm really curious to see how all of this is going to develop. And then of course, if this is like a sustained increase in price, what will the impact be on Tech One production? Ships, munitions, anything and everything in the game will be impacted by this. We definitely live in interesting times if what you enjoy is a sandbox economy like EVE's. That's gonna be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, I'll see you next time.